Sophia's pulse quickened as she stepped into the airport terminal, her heart racing with a strange mixture of excitement and unease. She glanced at the bright lights and the hustle of the crowded airport, but it all seemed so distant. Her mind was elsewhere. Tightening her grip around her handbag, she walked briskly toward the check-in counter. Her husband's airline. Skysphere Airlines. It was one of the most trusted names in the industry. Daniel had built it from the ground up, a man with a vision, a billionaire with a reputation for keeping everything under control. And yet, here she was, boarding a flight that made her feel unsettled. She couldn't put her finger on it. Maybe it was the uneasiness that had been gnawing at her for the past few weeks. The odd looks from the crew the last time they traveled together, the strange silences in the house after her husband had come back from a mysterious business trip. Sophia shook her head. Her mind was overthinking again. She needed to focus. She had a business trip to attend. This was just a routine flight. Nothing more. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the check-in agent said, snapping her out of her thoughts. Sophia smiled weakly and handed over her ticket. The agent didn't make eye contact, which felt off to Sophia, but she brushed it off. After scanning the ticket, the agent handed it back with a mechanical smile. "Your flight is boarding now. Please proceed to gate 23. Sophia nodded, thanking him, and made her way toward the gate. The terminal was packed. Children running, couples holding hands, business travelers glued to their phones. But Sophia couldn't shake the odd feeling that had settled deep inside her chest. The weight of it grew heavier as she neared the gate. The boarding area was quiet, much quieter than she expected. There were fewer passengers than she anticipated for such a big flight. She took her seat and waited. Minutes passed, each one dragging longer than the last. Finally, a flight attendant approached, smiling with that familiar fake cheerfulness. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," she said, her voice too high-pitched. Sophia nodded, returning a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The flight attendant scanned her boarding pass, glanced at Sophia, then quickly moved aside. Sophia walked down the jetway and stepped onto the plane. Her heart skipped a beat. The air in the cabin was strangely still. The usual buzz of chatter and laughter wasn't there. The seats, polished and clean, reflected the dim light in a way that almost felt too perfect. There was an odd sense of silence hanging in the air. She made her way to her seat in first class. Her husband's airline had always prided itself on luxury, and this was no exception. The plush leather seat greeted her as she slid into it, but the moment her body settled, a cold shiver ran down her spine. "Ma'am, would you like anything to drink?" another flight attendant asked, but she was speaking too quickly, almost too nervous. "No, thank you," Sophia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze scanned the cabin, resting briefly on the few passengers sitting in silence, their faces blank, some staring at their phones, others staring out of the windows. No one seemed comfortable. Sophia could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. The seatbelt sign flashed on, and a moment later, the pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," he began. But something about his tone was off. His words felt rushed. Too fast. Like he was reading a script, not speaking to passengers. Sophia leaned forward slightly, her pulse quickening as she listened more intently. His voice quivered ever so slightly on the last word. The tremor was subtle, but Sophia caught it. She wasn't imagining things. Something was wrong. The plane slowly began to taxi down the runway, and the roar of the engines filled the cabin. But still, the fear lingered. Sophia could hear her heart pounding in her ears, louder than the engines themselves. She tried to push the unease away, but it wouldn't leave. The creak of the plane structure and the hum of the engines didn't help. The flight attendants, who usually moved up and down the aisles with confidence, were instead huddled in the back. They exchanged quick whispers, their faces pale. Sophia caught their eyes once, then quickly turned her gaze to the window. Her throat tightened. Why were they acting like this? Was it just her, or did something feel off about the entire situation? The plane took off, lifting smoothly into the sky, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. Something wasn't right. She pressed the call button, her hand shaking just slightly. A flight attendant appeared almost immediately. "Yes, ma'am?" she asked, her voice just a bit too high. Sophia leaned in, her voice low. "Is everything okay?" The flight attendant hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting nervously. "Everything's fine, ma'am," she said quickly, "just a slight system issue." Sophia frowned, her instinct telling her the flight attendant was lying. It was the way she said it. Too rushed. Too practiced. Sophia nodded, but she didn't believe a word. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Sophia kept glancing around, but no one spoke. The cabin had become eerily quiet. The usual sounds of the flight, the soft chatter, the clink of seatbelt signs being fastened, were all missing. It was like the entire plane was holding its breath. Then, suddenly, the speakers came to life again, but it wasn't the pilot's voice this time. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Attention all passengers," a new voice said, smooth but cold. It was low, almost emotionless, and it sent a chill down Sophia's spine. The message was simple. And unsettling. "You are on Flight 714. This is not a standard flight. Follow all instructions carefully. Do not move. Do not ask questions. Welcome aboard." The message cut off abruptly. The silence in the cabin was thick, suffocating. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she looked around, her eyes wide with shock. What did that even mean? Not a standard flight? Why did the voice sound so strange? She looked down at her lap, feeling the blood drain from her face. Her hands instinctively reached for the seatbelt buckle, her fingers trembling. But that wasn't all. Something was wrong. Her fingers brushed against something cold under her seat. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't the life jacket. It wasn't the usual emergency kit. It was something metallic. She reached under the seat and pulled out the object. A small, black device. The red light on it blinked rapidly, like a warning. She could feel it buzzing in her hand. A small piece of paper was attached to the device. Sophia's hand shook as she unfolded it, her breath quickening. The paper was simple, just 6 words. Wrong flight. Wrong woman. Wrong time. Sophia's blood ran cold. Her throat closed. What was this? Who wrote it? And why? Her gaze shot around the cabin. She scanned the faces of the other passengers, but they all seemed too calm. Too collected. The man sitting across from her was staring directly at her. His eyes never blinked. They were cold, calculating, like he knew something she didn't. Sophia's heart pounded. Her hands trembled as she gripped the paper. She looked down at the device in her hand, the blinking light intensifying. The voice from earlier echoed in her mind. This is not a standard flight. And then it hit her. She wasn't supposed to be on this plane. She wasn't supposed to be here at all. Before she could react, a sound broke the silence. A voice, soft but clear, came from the back of the cabin. "Everyone stay calm. Everything will be okay. Just stay in your seats." But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control. The plane kept flying. The crew stayed hidden. The mystery deepened. And Sophia realized one terrible truth. She was not supposed to be on this plane. The hidden truth behind Flight 714. Sophia's breath hitched as she gripped the small black device in her hands. Her heart pounded like a drum in her chest, the steady thump drowning out everything else. The blinking red light on the device seemed to mock her, unrelenting, flashing with an almost sinister rhythm. She glanced around the cabin, her eyes wide with panic. The man sitting across from her, the one who had been staring so intently, was still looking at her. His eyes were like cold steel, unblinking, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. She wanted to look away, but something kept her locked in place. Her stomach twisted. What was happening? The flight attendants, who had been huddled in the back earlier, were now moving quietly through the aisles. They weren't smiling anymore. There were no offers of drinks or polite greetings. Their movements were stiff, almost mechanical. Sophia's hand tightened around the device, her fingers digging into the smooth surface. She tried to focus on her breathing. Stay calm. Stay calm. But it was getting harder. The unease, the sense of dread, it was palpable. And then, the voice came again. The cold, emotionless voice over the intercom. Passengers, we are experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Do not engage with crew members unless absolutely necessary. Sophia's eyes darted toward the seatbelt sign, which was still on, glowing a harsh red. But that wasn't what unsettled her. It was the words. Unexpected turbulence? There was no turbulence. The plane was flying smoothly, like every other flight she had been on. Her palms began to sweat. She looked back down at the device, the blinking red light casting an eerie glow on her hands. What was it? And why had someone left it under her seat? The silence in the cabin felt suffocating. No one was speaking. No one even seemed to be moving. Passengers stared out the windows, their faces impassive, lost in their own thoughts, as if they were all caught in the same trance. Except for one. Sophia turned her head sharply toward the man who had been watching her. He wasn't looking at her anymore. Now, he was staring directly at the flight attendants, his eyes narrow and calculating. His lips parted slightly, but he didn't say a word. Sophia's pulse quickened. She couldn't shake the feeling that this man was somehow involved in whatever was happening. And just as quickly, a thought hit her: what if he was the one who put the device under her seat? Before she could act on her instinct, the intercom crackled again. "Attention, ladies and gentlemen," the same cold voice said, "we will be reaching our destination shortly. Please prepare for landing. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for descent." A sense of foreboding settled over Sophia. Destination? They hadn't even taken off yet. This wasn't a routine flight anymore. There was no planned landing. No scheduled arrival. Her thoughts raced. What was this place? What did the voice mean by destination? The flight attendants moved with urgency, their actions precise but hurried. But no one seemed to question anything. No one seemed to be wondering what was happening. Except for Sophia. The plane continued to hum steadily, but there was something unsettling in the atmosphere, something that felt wrong, like a warning from the deepest part of her mind. Sophia's eyes flicked back to the man across from her. He wasn't looking at her anymore, but his presence was like a shadow in her mind. Every time she thought about him, her stomach churned. Who was he? She had to find out. She had to know what was going on. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sophia unclipped her seatbelt and stood up. The flight attendants hadn't even glanced her way as she made her way down the aisle, her footsteps muffled against the thick carpet. Her heart raced. Her palms were clammy. But she kept walking. She passed the flight attendants, who barely acknowledged her presence. They were busy, their heads bent low, whispering to each other in hushed tones. She wanted to stop and ask them what was happening, but something stopped her. The unease in her chest deepened. As she reached the galley at the back of the plane, she stopped and turned. The man was watching her again. But this time, his expression had shifted. It wasn't the cold calculation she had seen before. Now, there was something else in his eyes, something darker. It sent a jolt of fear through Sophia. She quickly turned away and continued walking. She had to get to the cockpit. She had to talk to the pilot. As she reached the door to the cockpit, she hesitated. She was about to knock when she heard voices inside. One was the pilot's, but the other voice wasn't familiar. It was deep, rough, like someone who had been through a lot. "I told you it's too soon. We're not ready." The pilot's voice was tight, strained. "We don't have a choice. It's now or never," the other voice growled. Sophia froze, her hand hovering over the door handle. She couldn't make out the rest of the conversation, but the words, "too soon," and "not ready," echoed in her mind. What were they talking about? What weren't they ready for? Before she could decide what to do next, the door opened suddenly. The pilot stood there, his face pale and drawn. His eyes widened when he saw Sophia standing in front of him. He quickly stepped back, his hands raised slightly as if to ward her off. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a low voice. "Please, return to your seat." Sophia's chest tightened. Something was horribly wrong. The pilot's voice shook, and he looked over his shoulder, as if making sure no one else had heard their conversation. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to return to your seat." Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't go back to her seat now. She couldn't go back without answers. Why isn't this a normal flight? Sophia demanded, her voice shaking with urgency. The pilot's face hardened. "I can't explain right now. Please, sit down. For your safety." But she wasn't about to sit down. Not until she knew the truth. She moved past him, into the cockpit. Her eyes immediately landed on the second man, the one she hadn't seen before. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing a military-style jacket. His eyes narrowed when he saw her, but he didn't speak. "Who are you?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling. "What's going on here?" The second man stood up slowly, his hand reaching for a small device on the console. "No one was supposed to see this," he said, his voice low and steady. And then, in an instant, the plane lurched forward. Sophia stumbled, crashing into the side of the cockpit. The world outside the window blurred. The plane was descending, fast. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't a normal landing. Something was terribly wrong. Sophia glanced back at the two men. The pilot was focused on the controls, sweat beading on his forehead. The second man's hand was still hovering over the device. Sophia couldn't breathe. She didn't know what was happening. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't getting off this plane the way she thought she would. Into the unknown. The hum of the plane was now replaced by the eerie sound of rushing wind outside, and Sophia's mind raced faster than the aircraft could descend. She struggled to keep her balance as the world around her seemed to tilt and shake. Every second felt like an eternity. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. Something wasn't right, this wasn't a normal descent. Her stomach churned with fear, the knot tightening with each passing moment. The second man in the cockpit was still standing, his hand resting over a black button, and his eyes focused on the instruments in front of him. The pilot, meanwhile, was muttering something under his breath. His brow was furrowed, and his face was as pale as death. Sophia didn't know what to make of it, but she knew it couldn't be good. She was standing in a cockpit where she wasn't supposed to be, and every instinct told her to get out. But she couldn't. Not without answers. "What's happening?" she demanded again, her voice shaking with a mix of confusion and fear. The pilot didn't even look at her. His hands flew across the controls, and he muttered, "We have no choice now. We'll have to land manually." The second man shifted, his jaw tightening. You think they'll notice? The pilot didn't respond. The plane was still descending at an unnatural rate. Sophia's hands gripped the side of the doorway to steady herself. She was on the edge of panic, but she fought to keep calm. She couldn't afford to lose it now. Her eyes locked on the second man. There was something off about him. Something dark. You said they, who is they? Sophia demanded, her voice a mix of defiance and fear. The man's lips twitched, a hint of a smile, or maybe it was a sneer. You'll see soon enough, he replied, his voice cold, distant. Sophia didn't like the sound of that. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. What had she walked into? The plane jerked again, and this time, Sophia felt a sharp pain in her chest as the pressure of the descent intensified. Her ears popped, and she stumbled backward, landing hard against the back of the cockpit. She gasped for air, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She was having trouble breathing. The walls seemed to close in around her. Get her out of here, the second man said suddenly, his voice sharp. The pilot finally turned his head, his face grim. You're not supposed to be here. Go back to your seat, ma'am. It's not safe for you. Not safe? What do you mean? Sophia's voice was desperate now. The adrenaline was making her hands shake. She didn't know who to trust anymore. The pilot wasn't acting like himself. The second man, whoever he was hiding something. The seconds felt like hours as she stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She knew she had to get off this plane, there was no doubt about that. But where could she go? There were no answers, no way to escape the downward spiral that seemed inevitable. The second man reached for something on the console, a small lever, and pushed it forward. The plane jolted, and Sophia gasped. Everything tilted sideways for a brief moment, and she had to brace herself against the cockpit door to keep from falling. Why are we descending so fast? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What's happening to us? The second man didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the pilot, his eyes hard. The pilot's lips tightened in frustration, but he said nothing. Sophia couldn't take it any longer. She had to know the truth. Who are you people? What is going on? The second man finally turned to her. He took a step forward, his eyes scanning her face with cold detachment. I told you, you'll see soon enough. He spoke as if he had no care for her fear. Before she could speak again, there was a loud sound, a grinding noise that echoed through the plane. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. The only sound was the rush of wind, a chilling reminder that they were still plummeting from the sky. The plane jerked again, sending Sophia flying into the console in front of her. She barely caught herself, her hands gripping the metal edge of the cockpit seat. Get back to your seat, the pilot shouted, his voice panicked now. But it was too late. Sophia could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on her, smothering her. She couldn't go back to her seat, not until she knew what was happening. And then, everything stopped. The plane leveled off. The grinding noise faded. The rush of wind died down. Sophia's head was spinning, and her breath came out in short bursts. What was going on? What had just happened? The cockpit door creaked open, and a third man stepped inside. He was tall, wearing a suit that looked far too formal for the situation. His eyes scanned the room with a cold, calculated look, as if he were surveying an asset, not a person. Are we clear? The new man asked, his voice smooth but with an underlying tension. The second man nodded without saying a word. The pilot glanced at him, then at Sophia. We have a problem, the pilot said, his voice low. It's not supposed to happen like this. We weren't supposed to get this far. What are you talking about? Sophia asked, her voice trembling with the intensity of her confusion and fear. The third man turned to Sophia, his eyes gleaming with something dark. "We've made a mistake, ma'am," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The mistake is, you're on the wrong plane." Sophia froze. Her heart dropped into her stomach. "Wrong plane?" she whispered. "What are you saying?" "Let's just say," the third man leaned closer, his voice barely audible, "you boarded a flight you were never meant to take. The crew made a huge mistake, and now we're all stuck with it." Her mind reeled. She had boarded a flight, yes. But this was something different, something terrifying. Sophia's hands clenched into fists. Her thoughts raced, but nothing seemed to make sense. She had to figure this out, and quickly. "Why?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Why was I chosen for this mistake?" The third man's smile widened. "That's something only you can figure out, ma'am." And then, without warning, the lights came back on. The whirring sound of the plane's engines hummed in the background again, calm and steady. But the atmosphere in the cockpit was anything but calm. Sophia stood frozen, unable to process what she had just been told. The third man stepped back, and the second man turned away from her, focusing on the plane's controls. The pilot sat back, his face hidden in the shadows. The plane was still flying, still descending, toward a destination that Sophia didn't understand. Her hands trembled. She didn't know what was going on. But she was more certain than ever that she had to get off this plane, before whatever was coming next was too late. The truth unraveled. Sophia sat in her seat, gripping the armrests so hard her fingers ached. The plane was eerily calm now. The hum of the engines was steady, but the atmosphere in the cabin felt suffocating. Her heart thudded in her chest, a constant reminder of the fear that had taken root inside her. She had to know what was going on. The man in the cockpit had said they'd made a mistake, but that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to explain the terror she was feeling. As she sat there, the seconds ticking by like minutes, she tried to piece together the fragments of information she'd gathered. Her mind raced back to the strange encounter in the cockpit, the man who'd said she was on the wrong plane, the second man who had been so detached, and the pilot who had seemed so out of place. Everything felt wrong. Sophia's stomach twisted with anxiety. She wasn't sure how much longer she could sit here. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it was time she faced the truth. But where could she even start? She glanced toward the cockpit again, her eyes narrowing. There was something about that third man. His cold smile. His words. And the way he'd said, "You boarded a flight you were never meant to take." It sent a chill down her spine. How could she have been on the wrong flight? Was this really some mistake, or was there something more to it? Taking a deep breath, Sophia stood up. Her legs wobbled slightly, the effects of fear and the plane's descent still shaking her, but she forced herself to walk toward the cockpit. She had to confront them, had to get answers. If they wouldn't give them to her, she would find another way. She reached the door and knocked once, hard. The second stretched, and then, the door opened slightly. The second man stood there, his face stoic. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sophia opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stepped into the cockpit, her eyes scanning the room. The pilot and the third man were at the controls, their eyes focused ahead, each lost in his own thoughts. "Are you going to tell me what's really going on?" Sophia asked, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. The second man's eyes flickered toward the pilot, who gave a slight nod. Then, the second man stepped back and let Sophia inside. "You need to sit down," the pilot said, his voice barely above a whisper. But Sophia didn't move. Not until she had answers. "I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth," she said firmly. She crossed her arms, taking a deep breath. The third man looked up from the controls, his cold eyes locking with hers. "We've been waiting for you to ask," he said, his voice smooth and calculating. Sophia's breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" "We don't have much time," he said, his voice now low, almost a murmur. "We're heading toward a place that doesn't exist on any map. And it's time for you to understand why you're here." Sophia's mind spun. None of this made sense. Where were they headed? What did he mean about a place that didn't exist on any map? She swallowed hard, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I don't understand." "What do you mean?" The third man leaned back in his seat, his hands folding over his chest. "Let's start from the beginning. You're here because you're part of something much bigger than you realize. Something hidden from the world. This flight was never supposed to happen. You were never supposed to be on it." Her pulse quickened. She could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins, but she had to stay calm. What did he mean? "You're not just any passenger, Sophia," the pilot spoke up, his voice heavy with an unspoken weight. "None of us are. We're all part of something called Project Athena." The name hit Sophia like a slap in the face. Her mind raced, her thoughts scattering like birds startled from their perch. She had heard that name before, but she couldn't place it. "Project Athena," she echoed. The third man nodded slowly. "It's a top-secret program. One that no one outside of a very small circle of people knows about. And you, Sophia, are part of it." The words hung in the air like a dense fog. Sophia shook her head, her thoughts trying to catch up with the information. "No, that doesn't make sense. I'm just a woman who booked a flight." "Not just a woman," the second man interjected, his voice tight. "You're the missing piece. We've been tracking you for years. Everything about your life has led us to this moment." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. The missing piece? Tracking her for years? This was too much. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to keep the panic at bay. "I'm not part of any project. I'm just—" "You were never meant to find out," the third man said, his voice cold and final. "But now that you're here, it's impossible to ignore. Project Athena was designed to push the boundaries of science, of humanity's understanding of the world. We needed you, Sophia. You were chosen, even before you knew it." Sophia's mind reeled. Her head spun. Her breath caught in her throat. "What is Project Athena?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The third man looked at her with a strange expression. "It's a program designed to alter human consciousness. To unlock potential in the human brain that no one has ever dreamed possible. And you, Sophia, have a unique genetic trait that makes you the perfect candidate." Sophia couldn't process the words. Her mind refused to accept them. She wasn't part of any experiment. She wasn't special in any way. She was just an ordinary woman with a family and a life. But then, the third man spoke again. "The crew's mistake was bringing you onto this flight at all. We were supposed to have you isolated, away from everything you knew. But now you know too much. And there's no going back." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. Her breath came in short gasps. She was caught in something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The third man's gaze softened, almost as if he regretted something. "We want you to join us. We want you to help us complete Project Athena. You're the key, Sophia. You always have been." The silence in the cockpit was deafening. Sophia sat there, her mind whirling, her body frozen. Everything she knew had just been shattered. Everything had changed in an instant. The third man rose from his seat, his movements smooth and calculated. "Soon, you'll understand," he said quietly. "But for now, we need to prepare. This is just the beginning, Sophia. And whether you like it or not, you're part of it now. Sophia didn't speak. She couldn't. The weight of the truth pressed on her chest like 1,000 pounds. She felt small, insignificant, lost in a world she didn't understand. But one thing was clear. Her life would never be the same again. The final chapter of the story. The truth about Project Athena has been revealed, and Sophia's life will never be the same. The suspense has reached its peak, and the unsettling mystery has been unraveled. Thank you for your patience and for the opportunity to bring this story to life.